Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bottom Line with Bob and Kendel Ehrlich. This is episode number 7. Please follow us at Earl, E-H-R-L, Bottom Line, at Bob_Ehrlich, and at Kendel Ehrlich. Here we are on our 7th episode. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for listening.
You don't have to welcome me. I live here.
That's right.
First, this week, we are going to brag. I'm going to limit us to 2 hours. No, I'm going to limit us to 2 minutes. Parent moment. Around here, football season is the 4th of July, Christmas, Easter, and everything else because we have 2 football players, and football is important to our family. We have a weird situation this year with spring football, limited season spring football, but football nevertheless. So we have a couple things to brag about this week from last week's opening game. Josh Ehrlich, junior quarterback, Broadneck High School, another 3 touchdown passes. That makes 59, by the way, in his short career. So he's off to a great start and a big Broadneck win, the Broadneck Bruins. Our older son, Drew, a academic junior and athletic sophomore at Washington and Jefferson College. We just found out before we taped our show, was named Rookie of the Year, Rookie of the Week, not maybe Rookie of the Year, who knows, but Rookie of the Week in the conference for his performance in their first game last week, wherein he had a pick six, 39 yards, and a blocked punt, and 6 tackles, and 2 passes defended. How's that for a rookie performance?
Quite a defensive game, I'll say.
And another big win, by the way, for a real powerhouse, Washington and Jefferson.
And of course, it's been a while for both of them to be on the field, so that's why we're so excited. The parents at the high school game were so excited to see each other, and everyone had their mask on and socially distanced, and it was all fine, and it was really needed by everybody. You could tell.
Yeah, I think the parents maybe more than the players, actually.
Really, it's the truth.
This is being replicated in other states as well, states that did not play this past fall. We're just sitting here praying for all the kids who did not get either the look they deserve or actually no look, the kids who were really shut down over the past year, the kids who are going to potentially lose out on college opportunities because of the decisions made by certain school boards in certain states. So we really feel for those kids. Athletics is one way that working class kids, poor kids, little Bobby Ehrlich out of Arbutus, Maryland,
Have opportunities.
So we take that to heart and we try to support high school athletics and youth athletics whenever we can. So this week we're going to be talking about first issue immigration, but a little bit of a different twist. Much of the analysis, much of the media reporting on immigration concerns issues that are familiar to most Americans. Stopping the rebuilding and the expansion of the wall, for example, under the Biden administration. The resumption of catch and release as a policy at the border. The cessation of the stay in Mexico policy, where that very successful policy has been now turned on its head by the Biden administration. We hear a lot of analysis, Republicans and Democrats going at it. We see the president and his administration tending to minimize the real crisis at the border. Everyone recognizes it. Most people recognize, I should say, the crisis at the border, because when lots of unaccompanied children show up, not just the adults, but obviously children, you have a real issue, which leads to our first issue this week, Kendel Ehrlich, on 2 aspects of this issue, this problem, this real crisis that are less analyzed by the press. One, sex trafficking, and the other, drugs.
Both of those issues, obviously, with the Border Patrol being so overwhelmed with the humanity coming over the border and having to deal with everything and organize people and treat them humanely and get them what they need. It's very overwhelming. So as a result, unfortunately, we see with Customs and Border Patrol statistics that in February of 2021, there were 97,000 arrests from the illegals coming over. There were also 523 unaccompanied minors a day over a 3-week period. estimates for March were 16,000 unaccompanied minors a day coming over that border. So in order to do that and to deal with that, what you have is the traffickers slash really cartels, when we're talking about coming from Mexico, in total control of trafficking, both labor trafficking and sex trafficking. So the cartels get paid by the families to begin with to bring the children over the border, and then, of course, take control of the children over the border when they can. And they can because so many people aren't paying attention. That means that the kids are very susceptible to both labor trafficking, working for the cartels, and then, of course, sex trafficking, which, of course, is a horror. And, the lives that these children coming over here to allege opportunity in America is guided by these cartels and is really no life for them at all.
Well, it's a high price to pay when
Absolutely.
you see these high percentages of these young girls who have been now subjected to sometimes torture, many times rape, some sort of sexual abuse.
Absolutely, and the boys as well. So it is an alarming and it's life altering. I mean, they'll never ever be the same from this kind of trauma. Lots of trauma going on. And then, of course, the drugs that are coming across. I mean, you've probably seen the videos of just walking the drugs across the Rio Grande. And on the other side, on our side, the United States side, private property that protects the cartels. And they continue to just funnel the fentanyl, the methamphetamine that is poisoning our country. In 2019, there were 70,000 overdoses, many of which were from single doses of fentanyl. And in 2020, it went up to 80,000.
Hey, talk a second about fentanyl, because you have become a real expert on this. You've had to become a real expert on this the last couple of years, particularly during your tenure as a deputy drug czar for the USA. How dangerous fentanyl truly is in the real world.
Well, in the old days, in the 90s, when I was a defense attorney then, the heroin was used mostly by middle-aged African-American men. And that really grew. Fast forward, when I was in drug court as a prosecutor in 2015, there were as many white women using heroin as there were anybody else. So a single dose of fentanyl put in with that, cut with that, which, if you watch the series Dope and watch the Baltimore series, you'll see the fentanyl drug dealers say, oh yeah, they just continue to crave the fentanyl. We just keep cutting it with fentanyl. And it's deadly in a single dose, one and done.
Now, we hear more about fentanyl with respect to China.
That's correct.
Than Mexico, correct?
Well, but it comes in through that Mexican border.
Right.
For a long time, it was being mailed in. We were able to get a handle on that. And so that Mexican border, and now with it being a complete sieve, that it is just open warfare with drugs coming in. So when the President Trump did have Remain in Mexico policy, and it was so effective, at least the agents were able to have the time, more resources, and able to really combat that. And it's not rocket science. The wall is a huge assistance. We need more of it around the Rio Grande. We need Mexico's help, but it cannot continue to allow both the drugs and or the traffickers to be in control of that southern border. And that's really what's happening. Not to mention just the people that are coming and the fact that they're illegal and that's against the law, all of those issues. But the two other issues also have long-term effects, traumatic effects, and are not good for our long-term use of anybody coming over that border.
Right. Well, I wanted you to talk about this a little bit, given your vast knowledge, experience in the area. These collateral, quote-unquote collateral issues are really not analyzed to a great extent by the media, but they are real and they are tangible and they are impacting and really hurting lives, particularly the lives of young children.
That's correct. And to the extent that those children unaccompanied either become part of a criminal gang, You know, their lives are not guided here as the land of opportunity, as many people, the media, the mainstream media would have you think. They come in with really no opportunity or a criminal life, and that's no life at all for them.
So the message from the Ehrlichs and the message from a lot of people, and forget right, left, conservative, liberal, progressive, Democrat, Republican, the message from America is you have to have a border, you have to have process, you have to have fairness. But fairness works both sides. It works with respect to folks showing up at the border, and it works with respect to U.S. citizens. And that seems to be what, now by the way, we talked about this last show, during the Trump administration, the Miller Trump administration, the caravans, and you got out of control, and then, boom, real policy implemented on the border. Resources were given to the Border Patrol. Stay in Mexico was adopted with Mexican cooperation,
Right.
obviously. And guess what? It worked.
It did work.
It worked.
And it's just so alarming to think about what's happening to these children, most vulnerable people in our culture, the children coming over unaccompanied, and the lives that they would have with these cartels leading the way. It's just very unsettling, and a lot more of it than you realize, and many people aren't even thinking about it. So give that a thought as you think about these issues about illegal immigration. Add those two to your thoughts.
So, a mass shooting in Colorado last week, which led to predictable reporting, predictable results, and predictable narratives. We talk about narratives actually for the remainder of the show, so keep that in mind. But I sat down and just wrote a series of rhetorical questions.
Which you often do.
Yes, I do, in my office, and you come by and see me doing it. So why the immediate narrative making? You have this tragedy, innocents just killed for obviously no reason. Why the immediate narrative? Why not just repeat the story, repeat and report the story? Why not just the facts? Why not wait for motive down the road, at least a few days, a few hours? Just get the facts. Why not real journalism? Why not real reporting? And why bring race into every single last issue in America today? These are all rhetorical questions because these are the questions we live with every day with respect to every issue. You even had the vice president's, I guess, niece tweet out something along the lines of, well, the shooter must have been white because the shooter survived. And you saw some of that, by the way, not just from the niece, but other folks out in the political world speculating about race and making this a race narrative. But of course, the race narrative didn't work in this case. So when they find out the race narrative doesn't work, it doesn't fit the narrative, they go to the next narrative, which is gun control. And we've seen that play out time and time and time again. The predictions, the reactions on the right, reactions on the left, very predictable. They play out every time. The problem in this case is the demand for more gun control is being heard by a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate and a very pro-gun control new president. And therein lies a problem for the Second Amendment and for law-abiding gun owners in our country.
I learned that a long time ago when I was on the defense side, that gun laws only hurt law-abiding citizens, because guess what? Criminals don't register their guns and abide by the law. But what really bothers me is going to the Twitter right away when something happens. You hear it on the news, and people go to Twitter. They have no idea what the facts are. They have no idea who's done what, where it is, and all of a sudden they start.
It's race, race, race,
And,
race
and then,
today.
and right now it's race, race, race. And then it was, oops, well, I didn't mean that. Well, it's all about gun control now.
Narrative 2. It's
Right.
the fallback, it's the reset.
And, it's always bothered me that people start speculating when something happens like that, what's going to happen, what a trial will look like, and they start trying it in the press. And that's really bothersome for a criminal justice system that generally works, is generally good, although right now it's on its head because so many prosecutors aren't prosecuting the law, and that's a real problem, and I know you're going to bring that up later on.
Yep.
But at any rate, tweeting right away is a no-no. Don't do it.
Well, this is interesting. I haven't been in public office since social media really took hold, right? but I see the pressure that elected officials, public officials feel with respect to the immediacy of a situation. The press, the media requires it. Now, I would like to think if I was in public office today, I would not be indulgent to that. I would actually wait. I would actually wait to garner the facts, to actually ascertain the facts before I came to any sort of conclusion, speculation, whatever, with regard to the incident. But that's clearly not the case. Politicians, these social influencers, they take advantage of the situation. They create their narratives before the facts are known, and that is a big problem for our culture and our society.
It's been going on for a while.
Now, speaking of this, I want you to think about this paradigm, because I know you are my biggest fan when it comes to my writing, and my last article
Correct.
in Western Journal talked about the 3 events that have defined the last couple years in American history, but also world history. But with respect to America, the good old politics in the USA, the major issues, how they've played out, how they've impacted everybody and everything in our culture. Think about it. You've had COVID, and you've had the Floyd death, and you had January 6th. And when you think about those 3 incidents, they've constituted the framework for the new narratives that are being laid out by the media and left-of-center politicians for the past couple of years. And we on the right, those in the middle, those on the right, have been forced to, quite frankly, on the defensive, to respond to those narratives. And let me just give you some context here. Think about COVID in schools. So you have the event, COVID. We weren't prepared. Nobody was prepared. Nobody knew what was going on. We've been very clear that whether it's the president or Dr. Fauci, whomever, should not be held to account early on, because nobody really knew what was going on. There was all speculation at the time. That led to lockdowns in schools, which that was the narrative. We need to lock down. We need to lock down. Some people are saying forever. And the consequences, well, we now have a new normal when it comes to education. And that's not. Well, that's the issue, because some folks, some teachers unions don't want to go back, clearly, until everyone's vaccinated, and then they'll move the goalposts again. But the consequence here is real and tangible. And we've seen the damage done to our kids. We've seen the press generally minimize that damage, basically playing the role of supporters of the teachers unions. And it's a real problem.
Although every study says that that being out of the classroom is not good for the kids, and the amount of depression and suicide rates and so many things, kids not being motivated, not wanting to
Suicide,
go to
right?
college, all of it,
Yeah.
I think has had a huge impact, and really every study says that. I mean, it just uncovers that the teachers union could care less about kids.
Not individual teachers, but
Not individual teachers, but the union itself just really doesn't care. And I think that most teachers want to get back to the classroom.
I agree.
They want to teach the way, at least
The teachers
in
we know.
the teachers we know that are in our son's high school, they want to get back.
The
They
coaches
wanna
want to
do their
coach?
they want it. They want their profession back.
Yes, they do. So you have this interesting situation where you have the COVID impact on schools, and the narrative is you can't have in-person learning, and the consequence is no normal. You have a new normal. The teachers unions are empowered, and left of center politicians have indulged that new power. And by the way, Joe Biden indulged that power all the way to the White House, because teachers unions played a major role in that campaign, and obviously mail-in balloting, which we'll get into in a second. The Floyd death obviously was a horrible event, and it led to a narrative, all cops are racist. And we have a racist society, and we've seen that now play out as the new narrative from many, many quarters. And even with respect to the curricula in school, whether it's the 1619 project or the 1776 project, we've seen. So the interesting thing is you have this death, this terrible death, and you have this new narrative, and now police have been placed on the defensive. Defund the police is now not necessarily a career killer for politicians, which is insane. Insane.
But this lack of respect for authority has been building and building and building for many years. I saw it in the court system, how, kids' lack of authority. I would prosecute teacher assault cases in juvenile court. So kids not respecting the teacher. And there's a time and a place to challenge whoever, but whoever's in authority, but sort of this general lack of respect for authority. And now it's extreme. I mean, it's extreme, and who are you going to call when you need someone? You call the police.
The social workers.
You call the fire department.
Yep.
You don't call the social workers. That's not who's there when a crime is occurring.
But the narrative
But the
is,
definition of crime is changing right now.
the narrative is the police are racist, the police are negligent, we need to defund the police, we need to minimize the role of police, which is obviously the type of narrative that is quite dangerous for our society, for our culture. January 6th, a couple hundred thousand people showed up in Washington. A couple hundred or more people performed criminal acts, invaded the Capitol, destroyed property. There were a number of deaths directly and indirectly related. I think 5 is the latest number to that riot. So you have the event, January 6th, and then you have the narrative, which was and is insurrection. Right, insurrection. Everybody came to Washington that day to take over the Capitol and intimidate Congress, and the president led it, which we saw in the context of impeachment, and that's the narrative. And the consequence is, under this new administration, we have a fence around the United States Capitol. We have National Guard troops still at the Capitol. We have a woke Defense Department. We have news out of the Defense Department on a daily, weekly basis that's more about wokeness than preparedness, more about wokeness than China, the real
Right, the
threat
real enemies,
presented by
right.
China these days. So it's a real problem, but again, it's a narrative and it's ingrained, and the press pushes it, and the left pushes it, and the right has been placed on the defensive.
But
Going-
again, there are other facts. There wasn't much, no one was arrested as they came into the Capitol. They let the property damage occur. People walked into the chambers
lots of
while
negligence.
police were talking to them.
There's
They
lots of
weren't
negligence
arrested
involved.
arrested
Lack of
at that
preparation.
time. And the consequence of the Capitol having barbed wire around it is just insane. This is a free country. It remains a free country. But they want that optic, not just for here, but for our enemies, in my view. I think they want that optic that way. We don't, because we recognize that we're losing right now. The more we have that kind of optic, the more we're losing. And they don't think like that.
By the way, the byproduct here of the last two issues is the impeachment, the generic impeachment of many members of our military and many members of our police forces. You know, they were sympathetic to the insurrectionists. You know, these are the white power folks and all this sort of narrative that's being painted by some folks on the left, by some members of Congress, by some of the members of leadership in Congress, and clearly the media. And it's just crazy, and it's not good for our country, and it's not good for our culture. Now, getting back to Floyd, terrible death, terrible circumstances, event. And then, again, the narrative, the criminal justice system is inherently racist. That's the narrative. And so another consequence is the promotion and the election and the empowerment of uber progressive prosecutors around the country, including this Gaston character in L.A., but not just him. Many of these prosecutors have been funded by the left, particularly George Soros.
Mm-hmm. Help get them elected.
They are uber progressive. They're not moderates. They're not liberals. They're in office.
Lawlessness.
Yes, they're in office to upset the entire criminal justice system, taking advantage of that racist narrative. You've lived in this system. You've worked in this
Which
system.
works, by
You've
the way.
supervised in this system.
Exactly.
What do you think?
You know, the system, I always thought the system was the best in the world. It has its faults. There's no question about it. But the documents that guide that system are amazing, and the respect that we should have for them should be strong. And right now, the lawlessness is very unsettling, because if we continue on that route, we end in chaos. And every little town has a courthouse in it in America, and that's for a reason. We've had respect for the law. We need to continue to have respect for the law. I think it started back with Freddie Gray, when the prosecutors all put their hands back and said, no, let them take those storefronts out, let them destroy all that property.
That was the political leadership too, there,
And,
by the way.
and protection of property has been a long time part of our system. So it's not just that property's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay to harm people, and it's not okay to harm property. And that kept going on. Now we're having even worse with drug.
Well,
I know you're going to get there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you get there, but it is so terrible for me to think that they are going to allow drugs. I know that the war on drugs is controversial. It's hard. It's there has to be there's some areas drug courts and drug treatment certainly help the stress on those that are addicted.
but let's get back to now the
And that's
chronology
important.
here. Let's get back to
Sorry.
the narrative. No. But
We're not tearing
I'm
it.
leading for you here. So you have all these events as a result of the Floyd death, and you have this indictment of our criminal justice system, and you have, as a consequence, one, you just talked about, and I'm glad you did, the propensity not to prosecute property crimes. And that message, by the way, went out, not just here, you said Freddie Gray, other, such as Ferguson. You have situations where literally these property crimes are not being prosecuted. That's a very clear, tangible consequence. But now you have, in places like Baltimore, we talked about it last night at home, the announcement came that Baltimore prosecutors will no longer prosecute possession cases.
Of any drug, not just marijuana, any drug. That's terrible. That is terrible for a city that is just infested with addiction. Terrible. It just puts an exclamation mark right on it.
And today, other misdemeanor offenses will not be prosecuted.
It was lawlessness.
Yeah.
Who's going to live there? Nothing but criminals.
Quality of life. Nobody talks about quality of life.
People will be afraid. They're going to leave, and Baltimore already has flight
Bleeding
population.
Bleeding middle-class folks, bleeding working class
What is it
folks
down
now.
to now? 500,000 people?
500,000 to 600,000 people. Our city once had 1 million people. So you've had flight. It's not racial flight. It's class flight, by the way.
Right.
It's white, black, it doesn't matter what your color is. You got kids, you don't want them in those schools.
Oh, the
you got a small
schools are
business,
horrendous.
you don't want to be in that city. You're gone. And as a result, you have an increasingly poor city. But again, a tangible consequence of what we're seeing play out nationally. Now, COVID, going back to COVID for a second. So one of the best lines I've heard from the campaign was Harris was a good running mate, but the best running mate that Joe Biden had was COVID, because COVID was the event. And the narrative became, well, we need to have wholesale, very liberalized mail-in voting. And a lot of people knew at the time, and we've talked about this, Republicans sat on their rights in many states. The mail-in voting process procedures violated state election law statutes.
Pennsylvania.
In Georgia, Republicans
fight.
basically sat down and negotiated a consent decree. The bottom line was that so many of the events, the processes, the policies that went down were in violation of those statutes, but nobody cared, and the courts weren't going to touch it after the election. So you have this issue, photo ID, this movement against photo ID, the narrative photo ID is racist, even though we've talked about this, I've written about this. You have to have photo ID for everything in life, everything you do, including going to get my allergy medicine, except vote, except exercise the franchise in the United States of America. It's crazy. So you have this narrative, and what's the consequence? H.R. 1. H.R. 1, the defederalizing of our voting process in America. And I don't think, we talked about this last week, I don't think H.R. 1 is going to pass, and even if it does, I don't think it will withhold, or withstand, I should say, constitutional muster. But it's a real consequence of the narrative. So we could go on, but I wanted to really, in this episode of our show here, talk a little bit about how these three major events in our history have framed our present dialogue, have framed the narratives that the media and the left is putting out, and have led to real consequences which have not helped us in any respect. So we need before we need to respond, before we need to make progress, we need to understand about what's happening and how the left is actually accomplishing their aims. And hopefully this show this week gave you a little insight into our challenges. And in future weeks, we'll be talking about where do we go from here.
And we'd love to hear what you think at Earl Bottomline, at Bob_Ehrlich, and at Kendel Ehrlich. Thanks for listening.
Godspeed.